I was standing in my greenhouse, admiring the tomatoes I had spent 3 months cultivating when Deborah Hutchins from the HOA marched through the door like she owned the place, clipboard in hand, and that signature condescending smile plastered across her face. "Excuse me, this is private property," I said, setting down my watering can. Deborah ignored me completely, walking around my greenhouse as if conducting an inspection, running her finger along the metal shelving I had installed last spring. "James, we need to talk about this structure. The HOA board has been discussing it, and we believe this would make an excellent community garden space for Meadowbrook Estates." I stared at her, waiting for the punchline that never came. "You cannot be serious. I built this greenhouse with my own money on my own property. It has nothing to do with the HOA." She pulled out a document from her clipboard and thrust it toward me. "Actually, according to our records, this structure sits partially on the drainage easement that runs along the back of your property. That easement was granted to the community for maintenance purposes, which means anything built on it falls under HOA jurisdiction." My jaw dropped. "That is absolutely insane. The easement is for drainage maintenance, not for you to claim my buildings as community property." Deborah's smile widened, and I could see she was enjoying this. "The board voted yesterday. Effective immediately, your greenhouse will be converted into a community garden space. We will need you to remove all personal items by the end of the month. We already have 12 residents signed up to use the space." "Get out," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "Get out of my greenhouse right now." She held up her hands in mock surrender. "There is no need to be hostile, James. This is for the good of the community. Think of all the families who do not have the resources to build something like this themselves. You should be happy to contribute." After she left, I stood there trembling with rage, staring at the document she had left behind. I had moved to Meadowbrook Estates in Raleigh, North Carolina 3 years ago, thinking the neighborhood would be a peaceful place to settle down after my divorce. The HOA had seemed reasonable at first, just standard stuff about lawn maintenance and exterior paint colors. But over the past year, Deborah had been elected president, and things had gone downhill fast. I pulled out my phone and called my brother Marcus, who worked as a real estate attorney in Charlotte. He answered on the third ring. "Marcus, I need your help. The HOA is trying to steal my greenhouse." "Slow down. What are you talking about?" I explained the whole situation while pacing back and forth in the greenhouse, my blood pressure rising with every word. Marcus listened quietly, and I could hear him typing in the background. "Okay, first things first," Marcus said. "Send me a copy of your property deed and the original easement agreement. Also send me whatever document Deborah gave you. I need to see exactly what we are dealing with. Can they actually do this? Probably not, but I need to see the documents." Easements have very specific purposes outlined in the legal language. If the easement is solely for drainage maintenance, they cannot just decide to use it for whatever they want. That is not how easements work. I felt a small measure of relief. So what do I do? Send me everything tonight. Do not remove anything from the greenhouse, and do not sign any documents they give you. In fact, do not communicate with the HOA at all until I review this. If they contact you, just say your attorney is handling it. After hanging up, I spent the next hour digging through my file cabinet, finding copies of the property deed, the survey, and all the HOA documents I had received when I bought the house. I scanned everything and emailed it to Marcus, then sat down at my kitchen table with a beer, trying to process what had just happened. The greenhouse had been my project, my sanctuary after the divorce. Sarah had gotten the house in Durham, most of our savings, and I had been left starting over at 42. Building that greenhouse had been therapeutic, something I could pour my energy into. I had researched for months, drawn up plans, ordered materials, and spent every weekend for 2 months constructing it. The thing was beautiful, a proper greenhouse with temperature controls, irrigation systems, and enough space to grow vegetables year-round. And now Deborah Hutchins thought she could just take it. My phone buzzed with a text from my neighbor, Tom Richardson. "Dude, did the HOA really claim your greenhouse? Deborah just sent out an email to everyone about the new community garden." I called Tom immediately. "What email?" "Hold on, I will forward it to you." Seconds later, my phone dinged. The email from Deborah was addressed to all Meadowbrook Estates residents with the subject line, "Exciting Community Garden Opportunity." I read through it, my hands shaking. "Dear Meadowbrook residents, the HOA board is thrilled to announce the opening of our new community garden space, located at 847 Pinecrest Drive. This generous contribution from the community will allow families to grow their own vegetables and herbs in a beautiful greenhouse setting. Sign-up sheets will be available at the next HOA meeting. Spaces are limited, so reserve yours today." "That is my address," I said to Tom. "That is my greenhouse. She is acting like I donated it." "That is messed up, man. What are you going to do?" My brother is a real estate attorney. "He is looking into it. But Tom, did you know anything about this easement issue? You have been here longer than me." Tom was quiet for a moment. "I mean, yeah, there are drainage easements along the back of most properties on our street. They run along the creek. But nobody has ever tried to use them for anything except maintaining the drainage ditches. This is crazy." We talked for a few more minutes before I hung up, feeling slightly less alone. At least some of my neighbors thought this was ridiculous. The next morning, Marcus called me at 7. "I have been up all night looking at your documents. The good news is Deborah is full of it. The easement on your property is specifically designated for storm water drainage maintenance only. There is absolutely no provision that would allow the HOA to claim structures or convert the space to recreational use. So what do? We send them a cease and desist letter. I am drafting it now. Basically, it will inform them that they have no legal right to your greenhouse and that if they continue to claim otherwise, you will pursue legal action. Also, and this is the interesting part, I looked into the easement agreement more carefully. Did you know that you, as the property owner, actually have the right to revoke or modify easements under certain conditions?" I sat up straighter. "What conditions?" "Well, if the easement holder misuses the easement or attempts to expand its scope beyond the original purpose, the property owner can petition to have it revoked or modified. In this case, the HOA is clearly trying to misuse the easement. We could file a petition with the county to have the easement either revoked entirely or modified to include very specific language preventing this kind of thing. Would that actually work? It is not guaranteed, but you have a strong case. The HOA has essentially admitted in writing that they are trying to use a drainage easement for recreational purposes. That is textbook misuse. The county does not look kindly on easement abuse because it creates legal confusion and property disputes. Do it, I said. Send the letter and file whatever we need to file. I am not letting them take my greenhouse. It is going to cost you. Legal fees, filing fees, possibly a surveyor to document everything, could be $5,000 to $10,000 before this is done. I thought about my savings account still recovering from the divorce. I do not care. This is the principle of the thing. If I let them get away with this, what is next? They will be claiming people's sheds and garages as community property. All right. I will send you the retainer agreement today. Once you sign it and send the deposit, I will get the cease and desist out immediately. I spent the rest of the day at work barely able to concentrate. I was a systems analyst for a tech company, usually working from home, but I had gone into the office that day just to get out of the house. My coworkers could tell something was wrong, but I did not feel like explaining the absurdity of my situation. When I got home that evening, there was a notice stuck to my front door. It was from the HOA, informing me that I had 14 days to remove my personal belongings from the greenhouse before they would be relocated to storage at the owner's expense. I took a photo of the notice and texted it to Marcus. He called back immediately, and I could hear the anger in his voice. This is harassment. They cannot give you a deadline to vacate your own property. I am expediting the cease and desist. It will be on Deborah's desk by tomorrow afternoon. That night, I could not sleep. I kept thinking about all the work I had put into the greenhouse, all the plans I had for expanding my garden. I had been experimenting with heirloom tomatoes, growing herbs to sell at the farmer's market, even considering starting a small side business. Now all of that was in jeopardy because some power-hungry HOA president had decided she wanted to control every aspect of the neighborhood. The next day was Saturday, and I was in the greenhouse early, checking on my plants and making notes of everything inside. If this turned into a legal battle, I wanted documentation of exactly what was mine. I was photographing my irrigation system when I heard voices outside. I looked out to see Deborah leading a group of about 6 people toward my greenhouse, all carrying gardening tools and wearing matching Meadowbrook Estates t-shirts. I stepped outside. "Can I help you?" Deborah's smile was bright and fake. "James, perfect timing. I am just showing our community garden volunteers the space. We thought we would get started on clearing out some areas for planting beds." "Nobody is clearing out anything. This is my greenhouse and you are all trespassing." One of the volunteers, an older woman I recognized from neighborhood barbecues, looked confused. "Deborah said this was a community space now. She said you had agreed to it." "She lied," I said flatly. "I never agreed to anything. This greenhouse is on my property, built with my money, and the HOA has absolutely no right to it." Deborah's smile finally faltered. "James, you are making this very difficult. The board has made its decision, and my attorney has made his. You will be receiving a cease and desist letter on Monday. If any of you step foot in my greenhouse, I will call the police for trespassing." The volunteers looked at each other uncertainly. The older woman set down her shovel. "Deborah, I do not want to be part of something that is causing problems. Maybe we should wait until this is sorted out." "There is nothing to sort out," Deborah insisted, but her voice had taken on a shrill quality. "The HOA has the authority to manage community spaces, and this structure is on the easement." "The easement is for drainage," I said. "Not for you to steal people's property. Now all of you need to leave before I call the police." The group slowly dispersed, the volunteers clearly uncomfortable with the confrontation. Deborah remained, her face red with anger or embarrassment, I could not tell which. "You are going to regret this, James. The HOA has lawyers too. We will bury you in legal fees." "Looking forward to it," I said, crossing my arms. After she left, I did call the police, not to report trespassing but to document what had happened. An officer came out, took my statement, and made a report. He said it sounded like a civil matter, but that I was within my rights to tell people to leave my property. Monday morning, Marcus texted me that the cease and desist had been delivered to both Deborah personally and to the HOA's registered agent. He also confirmed that he had filed the petition with Wake County to revoke the easement, citing misuse and misrepresentation by the HOA. "Now we wait," he said when I called him. "The HOA has 10 days to respond to the cease and desist. The county will schedule a hearing for the easement petition, probably in 4 to 6 weeks. What happens at the hearing? Both sides present their case. You will need to testify about what happened, and we will submit all the documentation showing the HOA's attempt to misuse the easement. The county will make a determination about whether to revoke, modify, or leave the easement as is. And if they revoke it, then there is no more easement, which means the HOA has absolutely no claim to any part of your property, including the area where the greenhouse sits. It also means you would be responsible for maintaining the drainage on that section, but that is a small price to pay." Over the next week, things escalated. I started receiving daily emails from the HOA, each one more threatening than the last. They claimed I was in violation of community bylaws. They threatened to fine me for unauthorized structures. They even sent a landscaping crew to my house to assess the community garden space, though I sent them away immediately. Tom kept me updated on the neighborhood gossip. Apparently, Deborah had been telling everyone that I was being selfish and preventing families from enjoying fresh vegetables. Some residents believed her, but many were starting to question the whole situation, especially after word got out that I had never actually agreed to any of this. The turning point came 2 weeks after the cease and desist was delivered. I was working from home when I heard a truck in my driveway. I looked out the window to see a construction crew unloading lumber and posts. Deborah's car was parked on the street. I ran outside. "What is going on here?" One of the workers, a young guy in a safety vest, checked his clipboard. "We are here to install fencing around the new community garden per the work order from Meadowbrook Estates, HOA. There is no community garden. This is my private property and you need to leave right now." Deborah emerged from her car. "James, the HOA has decided to move forward with the project. Your legal complaints do not change the fact that the structure is on the easement. My attorney sent you a cease and desist. You are violating it by being here." "Your attorney has no authority over HOA decisions," she said smugly. I pulled out my phone and called 911. "I need police assistance. I have trespassers on my property who are refusing to leave and attempting to damage my land." Deborah's eyes went wide. "You did not just call the police." "I absolutely did." The construction workers looked nervous and their foreman made a call on his cell phone. Within minutes, they were packing up their equipment. The foreman approached me. "Look, man, we are just contractors. The HOA hired us for a job. If there is a property dispute, we are not getting in the middle of it." "Smart move," I said. By the time the police arrived, the construction crew was gone, but Deborah was still standing in my driveway, arms crossed defiantly. I explained the situation to the officer, showed him the cease and desist letter, and provided the report number from the previous police visit. The officer turned to Deborah. "Ma'am, you have been informed by the property owner that you are not welcome here, and there is an active legal dispute about the property. You need to leave and not come back unless you have a court order saying otherwise." "The HOA has rights to this property," she protested. "That is for the courts to decide. But right now you are trespassing, and if you do not leave, I will have to arrest you." Deborah finally left, but not before informing me that the HOA would be pursuing every available legal remedy. That evening, Marcus called me, and he sounded excited. "The HOA's attorney just responded to the cease and desist. You are not going to believe this. They are claiming that the easement gives them broad authority to use the land for community benefit purposes, and that your greenhouse violates the easement terms because it interferes with their ability to access the land. That is ridiculous. It is better than ridiculous. It is provably false, and they put it in writing. This actually strengthens our case for revoking the easement. They are not just misusing it, but actively lying about its terms. I am amending our petition to include their response as evidence of bad faith. So this is good. This is great. They just handed us ammunition. The county is going to take one look at the actual easement language, compare it to their claims, and see exactly what they are trying to do. The hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks out, on a Thursday morning at the Wake County Courthouse. In the meantime, Deborah had apparently decided to wage a campaign against me in the neighborhood. She sent multiple emails to all residents painting me as a selfish homeowner who was preventing children from learning about gardening. She posted on the neighborhood Facebook group, though several people defended me in the comments. She even organized a town hall meeting at the community center to discuss property rights versus community needs. I did not attend the town hall on Marcus's advice, but Tom went and recorded parts of it on his phone. Deborah spent an hour ranting about how people like me were ruining the community spirit, and how the HOA needed more power to override selfish homeowners. Several residents pushed back, asking why the HOA did not just build a community garden on actual HOA-owned land or one of the common areas. Deborah's response was that my greenhouse was already built and perfect for the purpose, which just made her sound more unreasonable. Public opinion was shifting in my favor, but Deborah did not seem to notice or care. She was convinced she was right, and she doubled down at every opportunity. 3 days before the hearing, I received a certified letter from the HOA's law firm. It was a formal demand that I cease interfering with the HOA's use of the easement and threatening to sue me for damages if I did not comply. Marcus filed it as additional evidence. On the morning of the hearing, I put on my best suit and met Marcus at the courthouse. The hearing room was small, just a conference room really, with a table at the front where the county administrator sat with 2 advisors. Deborah was there with the HOA's attorney, a stern-looking man in his 50s who kept whispering to her. The county administrator, a woman named Patricia Winters, called the hearing to order and asked Marcus to present our case first. Marcus stood and laid out everything clearly and methodically. He showed the original easement document, highlighting the specific language limiting it to drainage maintenance. He presented photographs of my greenhouse, the property survey showing its location, and documentation of everything I had invested in it. Then he showed the emails and letters from Deborah and the HOA claiming authority over the space. The HOA has engaged in a clear pattern of easement misuse, Marcus said. They are attempting to convert a drainage easement into recreational space, which is not only beyond the scope of the easement, but directly contradicts its stated purpose. Furthermore, they have harassed my client, attempted to seize his private property, and made false claims about the easement's scope. This is exactly the kind of bad faith misuse that justifies revocation. Miss Winters took notes and asked a few clarifying questions before turning to the HOA's attorney. He stood and tried to argue that the easement language was ambiguous and that community benefit could be interpreted broadly. He claimed that since the greenhouse was on the easement, it technically interfered with the HOA's maintenance rights. Has the HOA actually needed to access that portion of the easement for drainage maintenance? Miss Winters asked. The attorney hesitated. Not specifically, but the point is that they need to maintain the right to access. And has Mr. Foster ever prevented the HOA from accessing the easement for legitimate drainage maintenance? We have not attempted to access it because the greenhouse is in the way. Miss Winters looked down at the documents in front of her. According to the survey, the greenhouse sits partially on the easement but does not block access to the drainage ditch itself. The ditch runs behind the greenhouse, not through it. The HOA attorney tried to recover, but Miss Winters was not having it. She questioned him about the specific language in the easement, about the HOA's attempts to claim the greenhouse, about the letters and emails. With every answer, it became clearer that the HOA had overstepped badly. Then Miss Winters asked Deborah directly, Mrs. Hutchins, did you tell residents that Mr. Foster had donated his greenhouse to the community? Deborah shifted uncomfortably. I said it would be used as a community space, yes. But did you tell them he had agreed to this? I assumed he would see reason eventually. So you represented to the community that you had authority over this structure before any legal determination had been made. The HOA board voted on it. That gives us authority. Miss Winters removed her glasses and set them on the table. Mrs. Hutchins, the HOA board cannot vote to give itself authority it does not legally possess. That is not how property rights work. The hearing lasted another 30 minutes, but I could tell the decision was already made. Miss Winters asked a few more questions, reviewed the documents again, and then announced she would issue a written decision within 10 business days. Marcus and I left the courthouse feeling optimistic. That went about as well as it could have, he said. Miss Winters clearly sees through their argument. I would be shocked if she does not rule in our favor. 8 days later, the decision arrived by certified mail. Wake County had granted our petition to revoke the easement entirely. The decision was scathing, stating that the HOA had grossly misrepresented the scope and purpose of the easement and engaged in harassment and intimidation of the property owner. The easement was officially revoked, effective immediately. I called Marcus, barely able to contain my excitement. "We won. We actually won." "I told you. They made it easy by being so blatant about it. Now you need to be aware that the HOA could appeal this decision, but given how strongly worded Miss Winters's ruling was, I do not think they would succeed. What do I do now?" "You enjoy your greenhouse in peace. Also, I would recommend sending a letter to all Meadowbrook residents explaining what happened, just to set the record straight before Deborah spins this." I drafted a letter that evening and had Marcus review it. It laid out the facts simply. The HOA had attempted to claim my private property, I had fought it, and the county had ruled that the HOA had no legal right to the greenhouse. I explained that I had never opposed a community garden in principle, but that building one on private property without permission was theft, not community service. I suggested that if residents wanted a community garden, they should petition the HOA to designate one of the actual common areas for that purpose. I hand-delivered copies to every house on my street and emailed it to the neighborhood listserv. The response was overwhelming. I received dozens of supportive messages from neighbors, many of whom said they had been uncomfortable with Deborah's approach but had not wanted to speak up. Several people apologized for believing her version of events. Tom came over that evening with a six-pack of beer. "Congratulations, man. You took on the HOA and won. That is basically impossible." We sat in my greenhouse drinking beer and celebrating. It felt good, not just because I had won, but because I had stood up for something important. Property rights mattered. The rule of law mattered. And HOA boards could not just do whatever they wanted because they had a little bit of power. But the story was not over yet. 2 days after the county's decision, I received an email from Richard Chen, another member of the HOA board. He asked if we could meet to discuss the situation. I forwarded the email to Marcus, who said it was fine to meet as long as I did not agree to anything without running it by him first. Richard came to my house that Saturday morning. He was in his 60s, retired, and seemed genuinely embarrassed by the whole situation. "James, I want to apologize," he said as we sat on my back patio. "The board should never have gone along with Deborah's plan. I voted against it, but I was outvoted 3-2. I thought it was a bad idea from the start, but I did not fight hard enough." "Why did the rest of the board support it?" Richard sighed. "Deborah can be very persuasive, and she has a way of making people feel like they are being selfish if they disagree with her. She painted this picture of families bonding over gardening, kids learning about nature, and all that." The other board members got swept up in the vision. Nobody wanted to be the person who said no to something that sounded so positive. "But it was my property. How did everyone just ignore that?" Deborah convinced them that the easement language was broader than it actually was. She showed them the survey highlighting that part of your greenhouse was on the easement, and she argued that gave the HOA rights. I do not think she actually believed it. I think she just wanted the greenhouse and found a justification that sounded legal enough. So what happens now? There is going to be an emergency board meeting tomorrow night. Several residents have demanded Deborah's resignation. I am going to make a motion to remove her as president even if she does not resign. I wanted to ask if you would be willing to attend and speak about what happened. I thought about it. Part of me just wanted to be done with the whole thing. But another part of me knew that if Deborah remained in power, she would try something like this again, if not to me then to someone else. "I will be there," I said. The meeting was held at the community center, and the turnout was massive. Every seat was filled, with people standing along the walls. Deborah sat at the front table with the other board members, her face tight and angry. Richard called the meeting to order and immediately addressed the elephant in the room. "We are here tonight because of the recent situation involving James Foster's property. As you all know by now, the HOA attempted to claim his greenhouse as community space, and Wake County ruled that we had no legal right to do so. This has been an embarrassing and costly mistake for our community." Deborah tried to interrupt, but Richard held up his hand. You will have a chance to speak, Deborah. First, I have invited James to explain his perspective. I walked to the front, my heart pounding. Public speaking was not my favorite thing, but I had practiced what I wanted to say. I moved to Meadowbrook Estates because it seemed like a good community, I began. I have always followed the HOA rules, paid my dues on time, and tried to be a good neighbor. When I built my greenhouse, I got all the necessary permits, made sure it complied with setback requirements, and did everything by the book. I never imagined the HOA would try to take it from me. I went on to describe everything that had happened. Deborah's initial visit, the threatening emails, the attempt to bring construction crews onto my property, the harassment. I kept my tone calm and factual, letting the events speak for themselves. I do not oppose a community garden, I concluded. I think it is a great idea, but it needs to be built on land the HOA actually owns or controls, not stolen from individual homeowners. What happened to me was wrong, and it cost me thousands of dollars in legal fees to defend my property rights. That should never happen in a community like this. The room erupted in applause. Deborah's face was bright red and she stood up abruptly. This is ridiculous. James is being dramatic. The HOA was acting in the community's best interest. So what if we made a small legal mistake? That does not erase all the good work we have done. A small legal mistake, shouted someone from the audience. You tried to steal his property? Another voice called out, how much did this cost the HOA in legal fees? Richard consulted a document. Our attorney billed approximately $8,000 for this matter. The room exploded with angry voices. HOA dues were already high, and nobody wanted their money wasted on a frivolous legal battle that the HOA had clearly been in the wrong about. Deborah tried to defend herself, but she was drowned out. Finally, Richard called for order and made a formal motion to remove Deborah as president. The vote was 4-1, with only Deborah voting against. Then one of the other board members, a woman named Susan Park, made a motion to remove Deborah from the board entirely. That vote was 4-1 as well. Deborah gathered her things and stormed out of the meeting, but not before turning to glare at me. You have ruined this community, she hissed. No, I said. You did that all by yourself. After she left, the meeting continued. Richard was elected as the new president, and the board voted to send a formal apology letter to me along with reimbursement for my legal fees. I had not expected that, and I felt genuinely touched by the gesture. Over the next few weeks, life slowly returned to normal. The HOA reimbursed me for Marcus's fees, which helped my bank account recover. Deborah resigned from the HOA entirely after several residents threatened to sue her personally for her actions. Richard proved to be a much more reasonable president, focused on actual community issues rather than power trips. Interestingly, the whole situation sparked a productive conversation about a real community garden. Several residents approached me asking for advice on building one, and I was happy to help. The HOA eventually designated a corner of the common area near the playground for a community garden project, and I volunteered to help design it. It was not as large or well-equipped as my greenhouse, but it served the purpose, and people seemed genuinely excited about it. Tom and I remained good friends, and he often joked that I was a neighborhood legend now. The man who beat the HOA was apparently quite a reputation to have. But the real satisfaction came from simply being able to use my greenhouse in peace. I continued experimenting with heirloom tomatoes, expanded into peppers and cucumbers, and even started selling produce at the local farmers market. The side business I had dreamed about was becoming a reality. One evening, about 3 months after the hearing, I was in the greenhouse transplanting seedlings when I heard a knock on the door frame. I looked up to see Richard standing there with a potted plant. "Hope I am not intruding," he said. "I brought you this as a thank you. It is a rare variety of basil, thought you might like it." "That is really thoughtful. Come in." Richard walked around the greenhouse, clearly impressed. "This really is something special. I can see why you fought for it." "It is more than just the greenhouse," I said. It was the principle. If people can just take your property because they decide it would be better used some other way, then nobody really owns anything. I completely agree. And I want you to know, I have proposed new bylaws for the HOA that specifically limit the board's authority. No more unilateral decisions like what Deborah tried to pull. Major actions will require a vote of the general membership, not just the board. That is a good change. It is the least we can do. What happened to you was wrong, and I want to make sure it never happens again. After Richard left, I stood in my greenhouse feeling genuinely content for the first time in months. The battle had been stressful and expensive, but it had been worth it. I had protected my property, held the HOA accountable, and even helped bring about positive changes in the community. As I watered my plants and watched the sun set through the greenhouse panels, I thought about how easily things could have gone differently. If I had not had Marcus to help me, if I had not been willing to fight back, if I had just given in to Deborah's demands, I would have lost something I had worked hard to create. The greenhouse represented more than just a building. It represented resilience, independence, and the importance of standing up for what is right. The experience also taught me about the nature of power and how easily it can be abused when there are no checks and balances. HOAs serve an important function in maintaining property values and community standards, but they need oversight and accountability. Deborah had seen the HOA presidency as a way to impose her will on others, to control and dictate rather than serve. That kind of leadership destroys communities rather than building them. In the months that followed, I became more involved in HOA meetings, not because I enjoyed them, but because I felt a responsibility to stay engaged. I wanted to make sure that the reforms Richard had proposed were actually implemented, and that future boards would not repeat Deborah's mistakes. The community garden that the HOA eventually built became quite popular. I held a workshop on greenhouse gardening and organic pest control, which about 20 residents attended. People began sharing produce, recipes, and gardening tips. The neighborhood felt more connected than it had before, ironically fulfilling Deborah's original vision, but in the right way, through voluntary cooperation rather than forced appropriation. I also got to know many of my neighbors better through the whole ordeal. People I had only waved to before became actual friends. There was something about shared adversity that brought people together, and many residents told me they had been inspired by my willingness to fight back against unreasonable authority. About 6 months after everything concluded, I was at the farmer's market selling tomatoes when a woman approached my stand. She looked familiar, but I could not place her at first. "You are James Foster, right? From Meadowbrook Estates?" "That is me." She smiled and extended her hand. "I am Jennifer Walsh. I live in Oakmont Hills, about 2 miles from your neighborhood. I heard about what happened with your HOA and I wanted to meet you." "Nice to meet you. What can I do for you?" "Our HOA is trying to do something similar to one of our neighbors. They want to claim his shed violates some easement and force him to tear it down. I told him about your case, and he wants to know if your attorney might be willing to help him." I gave her Marcus's contact information and spent a few minutes explaining the key points of my case. Jennifer thanked me profusely and bought 3 baskets of tomatoes before leaving. That encounter made me realize something important. What had happened to me was not unique. HOAs across the country were probably engaging in similar overreach, and most homeowners either did not know their rights or could not afford to fight back. I had been lucky to have Marcus and the resources to mount a legal defense. That evening, I called Marcus and told him about Jennifer. "You might have another client. Sounds like a similar situation to mine. I will be happy to help. You know, James, I have been thinking about your case. It would make a good article for a legal journal or maybe even a presentation at a real estate law conference. Your situation perfectly illustrates the limits of easement authority and the importance of property rights. If it helps other people avoid what I went through, go for it." Marcus did end up writing an article about the case, changing some details for privacy but preserving the core legal issues. He told me later that he received inquiries from attorneys across the country dealing with similar HOA disputes. My little battle with Deborah had apparently struck a nerve. As the first anniversary of the whole ordeal approached, I found myself reflecting on how much had changed. My greenhouse was thriving, producing more vegetables than I could use. My side business at the farmer's market was growing steadily. The HOA was running smoothly under Richard's leadership, with none of the drama and overreach that had characterized Deborah's tenure. But perhaps most importantly, I had learned something valuable about myself. I had always been someone who avoided conflict, who went along to get along. The divorce had knocked me down, and I had spent years just trying to rebuild quietly without making waves. But when Deborah tried to take my greenhouse, something inside me had snapped. I had found a strength I did not know I possessed, a willingness to fight for what was mine even when it was difficult and expensive and stressful. That strength had carried over into other areas of my life. At work, I was more willing to advocate for my ideas and push back on decisions I disagreed with. In relationships, I was more confident and less willing to compromise my values just to keep the peace. The greenhouse battle had been a crucible that forged a stronger version of myself. Tom and I were sitting in lawn chairs outside my greenhouse one Saturday afternoon, drinking beer and watching the neighborhood kids play in the street, when he brought up Deborah. "Have you heard anything about her since she left?" "Not really. I think she moved out of the neighborhood a few months ago. Someone told me she bought a condo in downtown Raleigh, probably better for everyone. She was toxic." "I almost feel bad for her," I said. "I mean, she was clearly unhappy about something in her own life and took it out on everyone else." "That is a miserable way to live." Tom looked at me skeptically. "You are a better person than me. After what she put you through, I would not waste any sympathy on her." "I am not saying she was right. She was absolutely wrong and she deserved to be removed from the board. But I have learned that hurt people hurt people. She was probably dealing with her own issues and handled them in the worst possible way." "You sound like a therapist," I laughed. 18 months of therapy after the divorce will do that to you." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the neighborhood. It struck me how peaceful everything was now, how different from the chaos and conflict of a year ago. This was what a community was supposed to feel like. Neighbors coexisting respectfully, HOA leadership serving rather than controlling, people free to enjoy their property without fear of arbitrary rules or seizure. As the sun began to set, casting orange light across the greenhouse panels, I felt genuinely grateful for everything that had happened. Yes, it had been stressful and expensive. Yes, I had lost sleep and spent countless hours dealing with legal documents and HOA drama. But I had also gained something invaluable. The knowledge that I could stand up for myself, that I could fight back against injustice and win, that I was not helpless in the face of unreasonable authority. The greenhouse stood as a testament to that victory, but it was more than just a structure. It was a symbol of resilience, of the importance of property rights, of the power of ordinary people to hold their institutions accountable. Every tomato I harvested, every seedling I planted, every hour I spent tending to my plants was a reminder that I had fought for something important and won. And in the end, that made all the difference. The following spring, a reporter from the local newspaper contacted me. Apparently, my case had attracted attention in legal circles, and she wanted to do a human interest story about HOA disputes and property rights. I agreed to an interview, figuring it might help other homeowners in similar situations. The article ran a few weeks later with the headline, "Homeowner Takes on HOA and Wins," a story of property rights and community accountability. It featured photos of my greenhouse and quoted both me and Marcus extensively. The article also mentioned the reforms that Richard had implemented in Meadowbrook Estates and highlighted how the community had come together to build a proper community garden. The response was overwhelming. I received emails from homeowners across North Carolina and even from other states, thanking me for standing up to my HOA and asking for advice on their own disputes. Some of their stories were heartbreaking. Elderly couples being fined thousands of dollars for minor violations, families forced to remove swing sets or playhouses because of arbitrary rules, homeowners losing their houses to HOA foreclosures over unpaid dues. I could not help everyone, but I did what I could. I connected people with Marcus and other real estate attorneys. I shared information about tenant rights organizations and HOA reform groups. I even started a blog documenting my experience and providing resources for others dealing with similar issues. The blog unexpectedly gained traction, and within a few months, I had thousands of regular readers. People shared their own HOA horror stories in the comments, and a community formed around the shared experience of dealing with overreaching homeowner associations. I began receiving speaking invitations from community groups, and even some law schools interested in my perspective on property rights disputes. It was surreal to think that my battle with Deborah had turned into something larger, a small part of a broader conversation about HOA governance and accountability. I never set out to become an advocate or activist, but circumstances had pushed me in that direction, and I found the work meaningful. Meanwhile, life in Meadowbrook Estates continued to improve. Richard's reforms had been formally adopted, including a requirement that any major HOA decision be approved by a majority vote of all homeowners, not just the board. The community garden flourished, with over 30 families participating. Property values actually increased, perhaps because buyers were attracted to a neighborhood with accountable leadership and a genuine sense of community. I expanded my greenhouse operation, adding a second smaller greenhouse dedicated to starting seedlings for other gardeners. My farmers market business grew to the point where I was considering whether to scale it up further or keep it as a profitable side hustle. The decision was a good problem to have. 2 years after the whole ordeal began, I was giving a presentation about property rights and HOA governance at a community law center in Durham when I noticed a familiar face in the audience. It was Deborah. She sat in the back, arms crossed, watching me speak with an unreadable expression. I felt my heart rate spike, but I forced myself to stay focused on my presentation. I laid out the timeline of what had happened, the legal principles at stake, and the lessons learned. I tried to keep it factual and not personal, though it was impossible to tell the story without making it clear that Deborah had been wrong. After the presentation, during the Q&A session, Deborah raised her hand. The room fell silent and I could feel the tension. "Yes, you have a question." I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. She stood up slowly. "I just wanted to say that I still believe the HOA was acting in the community's best interest. Maybe we went about it the wrong way, but the intention was good. That should count for something." I took a deep breath. Intent does matter, but it does not override property rights or the rule of law. You genuinely believed you were doing something good for the community, and I do not doubt that. But the road to overreach is paved with good intentions. The question is not whether your goal was worthy, but whether your methods were legal and ethical. And in this case, they were not. Deborah looked like she wanted to argue further, but she just nodded slowly and sat back down. After the presentation ended, she approached me as I was packing up my materials. "James, I owe you an apology," she said quietly. "What I did was wrong. I got caught up in the idea of creating something great for the neighborhood, and I convinced myself that the ends justified the means. They did not. I am sorry for what I put you through." I was genuinely shocked. This was the last thing I had expected from her. "I appreciate you saying that. It could not have been easy to come here tonight." It was not, but I have been doing a lot of thinking over the past 2 years. I lost my position, my reputation in the community, and eventually my home because of my own arrogance. I thought being HOA president meant I had the authority to do whatever I thought was best. I was wrong. We talked for a few more minutes, and I could see that she was genuinely remorseful. She had been through her own journey of reflection and growth, forced to confront the consequences of her actions. I did not forgive her completely. The scars from that battle ran too deep, but I could acknowledge her apology and move forward. After she left, I sat in my car for a while, processing the encounter. It felt like a final chapter closing, a sense of resolution I had not known I needed. Deborah had faced consequences for her actions, learned from them, and was trying to make amends. That was more than many people in positions of power ever do. Driving home that night, I thought about how much my life had changed since that day Deborah first walked into my greenhouse. I had gone from someone just trying to rebuild after a divorce to someone standing up for property rights, helping other homeowners, and speaking publicly about issues I cared about. The greenhouse battle had been a catalyst for personal growth and unexpected opportunities. When I got home, I walked out to my greenhouse, now illuminated by soft LED grow lights. My plants were thriving, rows of tomatoes, peppers, herbs, and experimental varieties I was testing for next season. This space, which had almost been taken from me, had become not just a garden but a symbol of something larger. The importance of standing up for what is right, of protecting what you have built, of holding those in power accountable. I never asked for the battle with the HOA. I never wanted to become a property rights advocate or spend thousands of dollars on legal fees. But sometimes life pushes you into situations you did not choose, and the only option is to stand and fight. And sometimes, when you do, you discover strength you did not know you had and create change that extends far beyond yourself. As I tended to my plants that evening, I felt profoundly grateful, not despite what I had been through, but because of it. The greenhouse was more than a building. It was proof that ordinary people could challenge unjust authority and win, that communities could reform themselves when citizens stayed engaged, and that one person standing up for their rights could inspire others to do the same. The HOA had tried to claim my greenhouse as community space, declaring I never asked for that intrusion. But by standing firm, revoking that easement, and fighting back against overreach, I had protected not just my property but the principle that our homes are truly ours. And that was a victory worth every difficult moment along the way.